Well, good morning. Just getting the muffler on there because it's a little windy here at Kirkby Misperton on the morning of Thursday, 7th of December 2017. Now, over the last week or so, we've had some very interesting developments, and of course, last Friday morning, we were speculating as to whether or not Barclays Bank, trading as Third Energy on the well site behind me here, had actually fracked, having taken the gift of a heads up from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy as to whether or not they had taken advantage of the loophole in the Infrastructure Act to actually go ahead and frack without Greg Clark's permission, pending that loophole being addressed. Well, what we understand is that Greg Clark has now found the opportunity to cover his proverbial butt. And, we speculated that Greg Clark, being a very young, relatively, at 50 years of age, ambitious politician, with his eyes set on one day succeeding Theresa May and perhaps even entering number 10, saw this as the political grenade that it truly is, and was desperately trying to find a way to actually get out of being the signatory to sign this thing off. And what it appears that has now occurred is that he's effectively dodged this bullet and passed the buck to the Office of Oil and Gas. So this is the Oil and Gas Authority, basically, the OGA. And there's a nameless individual. Greg Clark, of course, is very clearly an identifiable individual as the Minister of State. But, few people know who is actually going to put their signature to it in the Oil and Gas Authority. Now, the Oil and Gas Authority obviously reports into Greg Clark, but of course there is the distance there, the plausible deniability. And whilst it seems that the Oil and Gas Authority have to take into account the views of the Secretary of State, I mean, we know how that's going to go. He said, well, officially my line, of course, is that, I'm going to rely on you guys to give me the due counsel and then get them to sign it off. And so if anything does go wrong, he's going to say, well, I just took the advice and guidance from the Oil and Gas Authority. So are we surprised? Of course not. Because have we really got any politicians? Well, I think we can name a few. Perhaps Dennis Skinner in Bolsover. And, I'm sure there's one or two others, although the names don't exactly roll off the tip of my tongue. But I'm sure there are a few politicians who do the best they possibly can to maintain absolute integrity. But of course, once they get into high office, they are very quickly compromised. And they have to demonstrate their flexibility and their ability to effectively sell their soul. And of course, once you've sold it once, then after that, basically, it's pretty easy stuff, isn't it? So what we have now is supposedly some of the loopholes closed in the Infrastructure Act. So now wells drilled before 2016, such as this one here, which was drilled in 2013, are covered. And here it was only the first stage that exceeded the 1,000 cubic meters, the political definition of the amount of fluids necessary for it to be classified as a frack. But that has now been addressed. So the one thing that's still outstanding, of course, is the attempts to do what is euphemistically known as a mini frack, i.e. a frack where each stage is less than 1,000 cubic meters, which is 220,000 gallons, and or the total project is more than 10,000 cubic meters, i.e. 2.2 million gallons. So obviously we have a political class that is beholden to the oil and gas industry, and they are desperately trying to find ways to undermine prevailing legislation, just like INEOS are, of course, in the North Midlands, in North Derbyshire, South Yorkshire, where they have served notice that they want to bypass all local authorities and go straight to the Secretary of State. Meanwhile, of course, they're threatening to sue the National Trust for not permitting them to conduct seismic testing on their property. So it's all still down to Greg Clark. I mean, let's not let him off the hook. The bottom line, Greg, is if the Oil and Gas Authority sign this off and you effectively sanction that, it's still on your head. And, you know, I'm basically calling upon the anti-fracking community and all those who are campaigning in one way, shape or form to prevent this abomination from becoming established in this country. Never forget, it's Greg Clark. So regardless of what occurs in his political career over the next 20-25 years or so, hold him to account for this. Because if this kicks off here, it may take 10-15 years. It might. Hopefully, you know, the problems would manifest sooner than that and get it shut down. But Greg Clark, being 50 years of age, is most likely going to have to live with the consequences of his Oil and Gas Authority decision to sign this off here at Kirkby Misperton. And of course, let's not forget, it's Barclays Bank. And the Tagger Barclays campaign, you know, continues through the month and into the new year. And as the footfall in town centres, of course, is at very high levels over the next few weekends, it's a great opportunity to go down to your local Barclays Bank and spread the word to the customers and to the staff that they are working for a bank that is driving this unconventional gas industry in the UK right now. They are on point. And so, you know, we call upon Barclays Bank to pull the plug. And we are seeing suppliers backing out. And, you know, there was great action at Horse Hill last week where the site was occupied for some 60 hours before they were evicted with no arrests. But then there was an action at Leith Hill where a vehicle was trying to deliver a porta cabin. It's believed without the necessary permission from the local authority and certainly without the traffic management plan being approved. But there was a lock on there preventing it from entering the site. And when the delivery company, which I believe was Crossways, were contacted, they stated that they had no idea that they were delivering to a frack site and that they had simply been just given the instructions as to where to deliver it and hadn't, you know, done any further research. But now that they were aware of the fact that it was going to Europa's prospective frack site on Leith Hill, just outside Dorking in Surrey, they have announced that they are absolutely with the anti-fracking campaign and will not knowingly deliver to any site or any company involved in this abomination. And this is another way in which obviously the campaign is proving to be very successful. The number of suppliers that are pulling out because they are realizing what they're associated with is increasing almost daily. And of course, when INEOS publish their suppliers list, as they have to do under the injunction, then that's great, because it tells us who it is that we need to contact to encourage them to not be associated with this company. And of course, I call upon all other businesses that are anti-fracking to support those companies that have had the integrity to pull out. Now, yesterday I talked about the evidence from 2012. In fact, articles that were published 1 month before the moratorium was lifted in this country, almost exactly 5 years ago in December 2012, which effectively proved that there was an awareness of the impact on livestock. And we talked about the experience of farmers in North Dakota over the Bakken Shale play who had terrible losses amongst their cattle, and in fact no longer ate it, no longer sold it to family or friends, but it was still being used in the food chain as animal feed. So we still have contaminated product coming into the food chain. Now today, another area that I want to look at is that of stillbirths. And you know, I have made this observation to somebody who is closely associated with the oil and gas industry at a social event I was at last May. Now, admittedly, she'd had a glass of wine or two, but she said, "Oh, I hear you're the anti-fracker." And I said, "Well, has been said that you know, I'm against this industry." And she said, "Well," she said, "I've seen some of the things that you've been posting, and all I can say is stay with the contamination of the soil, because that'll get people's attention. But when you start talking about stillbirths and prenatal deaths, then, well, actually you're losing it, because that's just rampant conspiracy." Well, this is yet another incident of cognitive dissonance. And it is amazing how the brain is able to compartmentalize and push aside facts if your income depends on you actually not acknowledging those facts. Well, you know, we have a situation in the UK with the nuclear industry, and you know, the high instances of leukemia, of cancers, of prenatal distress in areas of the UK where there is nuclear facilities. And of course the government for now 60 odd years has banked on the technology becoming available to deal with the contamination and to deal with the waste, and yet that technology hasn't emerged. And up until 1983, of course, a lot of the nuclear waste was dumped at sea, and some of it, or a lot of it, in the Herd Deep, a trench just to the north of the Channel Island of Alderney, where there are almost no children because the families have realized that the high levels of leukemia on the island are attributable to the toxic nuclear waste that was dumped some 40 odd years ago, 30, 40 years ago, in the Herd Deep just to the north of the island. And in the Sellafield area, you simply get compliant NGOs like Public Health England to say, no, there's nothing to see here, no, cancer levels are just the average. Really? Well, of course, that's what they potentially are trying to create with this network of boreholes right across the country, so they can bury this toxic waste, spread it out, and then, of course, there won't be any clusters because the whole of the north of England will be impacted. But the information, the awareness of the unconventional gas industry's impact on pregnant women and on the unborn child and on the newly born child was flagged up certainly as early as 2013. And I can trace what I think is the sort of original case that was flagged up to Vernal in Utah. Now, Vernal's a community that I visited a couple of times when I was working in the oil and gas industry in the United States with Schlumberger. And Vernal, Utah is in just a beautiful part of the States, and the red canyons in that area are truly stunning. Well, back in 2013, one of the midwives there, who had been working in the community for some 30 odd years and had never had a stillbirth. And then in 2013, she had her first stillbirth. And then as she started to speak with her colleagues, she realized that the number of stillbirths in the area was increasing exponentially. So whereas the registered number of stillbirths in Vernal, Utah and the surrounding areas was the national average in the US up until about 2011, today it's more than 15 times higher than the national average. And the midwives got together and to try to discern what had changed in the area. And of course what they came down to was the phenomenal rise of the unconventional gas industry in the area, with some 11,000 wells being drilled in a relatively short time. And the population of Vernal, Utah is about 10,000, but in that area has a population of about 30 odd thousand, and 11,000 wells in an area that has a population of 30,000, and it's not an enormous area, and inevitably there is going to be some knock-on effect. And there have been studies now. There have indeed been studies, and I implore you, that I will put some links under this video, but implore you to search fracking and stillbirths. And you'll find the original articles from Vernal, Utah. You'll see that it was reported in Newsweek, and then you'll see that reported in The Ecologist are the links to the academic studies which show that the carcinogens and the endocrine disruptors, as identified by Dr. Theo Colborn, and please, download the spreadsheet that was the life's work of Dr. Theo Colborn from frackingnightmare.com, and take a look for yourself at the horrendous impact that the chemicals used in this industry have on the ecology, on livestock, and on human health. So, not only is the effect on the unborn child leading to stillbirths, but the chemicals that are measurable in the atmosphere have also been linked to a phenomenal drop in male sperm count. So, conspiracy theory? Well, yes, of course it is, if you don't want to look at the information. If you simply want to regurgitate the government and the industry narrative, which you will never hear include the request for people to do their own research. And this is absolutely crucial. Now, I wish this morning I was actually talking about, dolphins being stillborn, because if I was talking about dolphins, then no doubt this video would go viral. But I'm just talking about humans. So, we can deal with that. That just happens. Sad, isn't it? It's really sad as to what triggers a reaction. And, this information has been shared with these communities that are in the sacrifice zones, but it's still not enough to actually get them motivated to actually do what needs to be done to prevent this industry from establishing a footprint. It's very sad, but on the other hand, I take my hat off to the establishment, because you have created a situation where people are in debt slavery to the point where, regardless of what's going on around them, unless it's literally right outside their front door, they will turn a blind eye or bury their head in the proverbial pile of whatever that's they've got access to. It's so sad, because the evidence is all there for everybody to see. And the anti-fracking community, unfortunately, it's a bit of an echo chamber, and stuff gets shared within the community, and within that community people are incredibly well informed. The challenge, of course, is to get this information out into the wider community. And you might occasionally see some of the stuff that I and others talk about in the mainstream media, but the mainstream media there is serving a purpose. Of course, it's creating a narrative, and the punchline in any article that appears in the British press would be, but in the UK this won't be a problem because we have robust regulatory control, gold standard regulation. Well, if you say it often enough, then it just becomes a mantra. The fact that it's complete lies, it's not even obfuscation, because as I said a few days ago, we now have the Environment Agency starting to become very clear about what they're not responsible for. And I can tell you one thing that the Oil and Gas Authority is not responsible for. It's not responsible for protecting the ecology of this country. It's not responsible for ensuring good human health. It's not responsible for preventing stillbirths. It's not responsible for low sperm count. All it's responsible for is energy security. And Greg Clark will simply take their nod and then put his signature on the document. And I think what we can see is that he is manoeuvring to do precisely that. We often hear the phrase energy security bandied about. Now, I'm not going to get into that. I've discussed that many times previously. Despite the fact that, that's really a crock, what we should really be talking about is food security. Because this country already imports around 50% of its food requirements, despite, phenomenal, still prime agricultural land across, all regions of the UK. But if that land, when that land is destroyed, which it will be if this industry actually gets established, then basically the country will have no food security. The country will be beholden on its ability to trade with other partners. And yet we have the capacity to enhance the food security of this country with the appropriate support of the farming community. And of course, there's other aspects to that, like the excessive use of nitrates and so on and so forth. But hey, one thing at a time. In the short term, it's about protecting this land for the future use of future generations, so that the food security in this country can be sustained. 50% for me is not food security, and it's going to be a lot easier to import hydrocarbons in the dying years of a hydrocarbon-driven economy than it is to bring in food from goodness knows where, and also to try and maintain the quality of that food. You know, it's still not legal to grow GM crops in the UK and in many parts of Europe. But if we're reliant on imports, then obviously the quality is going to be somewhat questionable. And, you know, I don't know whether I mentioned this the other day, but I was looking at some photographs of Orgreave, which is just 33 years ago. And although the photographs are disturbing, and as we now know, you know, the military were drafted in to support the police during the miners' strike. But one of the things that strikes you about the photographs from 1984 is that everybody's healthy. No, you know, there's nobody that's overweight, nobody that's obese. So the quality of our food has already deteriorated dramatically in the last 33 years. And if this industry kicks off, then, you know, well, we're pretty much into the realm of transhumanism, aren't we? Because that's what it's going to have to be. Well, we're all to play for still, all to play for. Greg Clark still hasn't signed this off. The Oil and Gas Authority, as far as we know, haven't yet submitted their recommendation. It's still time to make sure that Greg Clark understands that he ain't going to get off the hook that easy. He's still going to be held to account. So let's do whatever it is that we need to do to try and prevent Barclays Bank from fracking this site here in Kirkby Misperton, and then support the communities in South Yorkshire, in Nottinghamshire, in North Derbyshire, in Surrey, in Sussex, in Hampshire, and potentially in Dorset, who are all up against this pernicious abomination of unconventional gas exploitation. So let's see what unfolds. But ultimately, it's down to each and every one of us. This is not time to abdicate that responsibility, because, you know, those people who are aware or have even the slightest inkling of what could occur if this industry gets a foothold, then in 10 years' time, if there's a network of wells across the north of England and we're starting to see all the symptoms that we had all the foresight for from the US and from Australia and from Canada, then, you know, what are we going to do? What are we going to tell our children? You know, what were we doing when this industry was trying to get established in the UK? Thanks again for joining me today, and I will be back from tomorrow morning at 8:30 with the last live stream of the week. So thanks again, and please do your own research, encourage others to do their own research, and don't allow yourselves to be gonged. Thanks a lot. Bye now.